The Zixaran Empire stood as a beacon of technological marvel and strict societal order in the galaxy. Its people, known for their unmatched advancements, had conquered the stars, their civilization thriving in a world where every aspect of life was meticulously engineered and controlled. Princess Ilera, the Empire's beloved figurehead, was more than just royalty. She was a symbol of perfection, bred for leadership in a society that valued precision above all else. Her life had been one of luxury, but also of immense responsibility, always under the watchful eyes of her people and the Empire's leaders. As her sleek, advanced spacecraft tore through the fabric of space, everything she had known was abruptly ripped away. A sudden, violent attack from a rival alien faction threw her ship off course, systems failing one by one as alarms blared. Ilera fought to regain control, but the ship plummeted, spiraling towards an uncharted planet. The impact was devastating. Metal screeched and groaned as the ship's hull was shredded upon landing, flames erupting from the wreckage. Ilera was thrown from her seat, her body slamming against the control panel. Pain seared through her as she clutched her side, blood oozing from a deep gash. The communications system sputtered and died, leaving her utterly alone, her connection to the Empire severed. Smoke filled the cabin as she stumbled to her feet, her advanced training the only thing keeping her from collapsing. She grabbed what little she could, a small, damaged device that might still function, and a weapon of Zixaran design, sleek and lethal. But even as she armed herself, she knew these tools were a shadow of the Empire's might, reduced to useless trinkets on this unknown world. The sounds of the hostile faction's ships fading into the distance told her one thing: they were coming for her. The world she found herself on was a far cry from the engineered perfection of her home. Dense forests, with trees towering high above, blocked out much of the sky, their twisted branches creating an almost claustrophobic canopy. The air was thick with moisture, and the ground beneath her feet was soft and uneven, a stark contrast to the immaculate surfaces she was used to. Strange sounds echoed through the woods, alien creatures calling out in the distance, their cries a haunting reminder that she was far from safety. The weather was unpredictable. One moment, the sun blazed hot, the next, dark clouds gathered, promising a downpour. Ilera's initial assessment was one of disdain. This planet, with its untamed wilderness and primitive landscape, was beneath her, a backward place unworthy of her presence. The tools and devices she carried, which could have easily saved her in the Empire, were now useless, their advanced technology crippled by the harsh environment. Anxiety gnawed at her. She was alone, injured, and stranded in a place that defied her every expectation of order and control. The dense vegetation and unfamiliar terrain only amplified her fear. The great Princess Ilera, heir to the Zixaran throne, was now nothing more than a vulnerable being, lost in a world that seemed to conspire against her survival. Through the underbrush, a figure moved with silent precision. Rylan, a seasoned hunter and inhabitant of this wild planet, had been tracking a beast when he noticed something unusual, a disturbance in the forest, a sound unlike any he had heard before. Curiosity led him to the crash site, where he observed the wreckage from a distance. His life had been one of solitude, living off the land, understanding its rhythms and respecting its dangers. The planet was his home, its untamed nature a part of him. He wore furs and leathers, the remnants of his hunts, and carried a bow and knife, tools that were extensions of his being. Ryland's gaze fell upon Ilera, who, despite her injuries, held herself with an air of authority. Yet, her appearance and behavior were unlike anything he had seen. Her clothing, her bearing, the way she moved with a mix of grace and pain. When she finally noticed him, her reaction was swift and defensive. Her eyes widened in shock as she took in his rugged appearance, the primitive weapons, and the wild look in his eyes. She raised her weapon, but Ryland merely held up his hands, showing he meant no harm. Intrigued by her, he stepped closer, but the princess recoiled, clearly dismissive of his primitive ways. Their initial interactions were fraught with tension. Ilera, though injured and in need, was reluctant to trust this stranger. His appearance and methods were alien to her, just as her advanced but now useless technology was to him. Rylan, on the other hand, was wary of the strange woman who had fallen from the sky. Her arrogance and clear disdain for his way of life made him cautious. Yet he couldn't deny the fascination she stirred in him, a being so out of place, yet commanding in her vulnerability. Despite the mistrust between them, the hostile faction was still out there, and both knew that survival depended on cooperation. Ilera, though proud, was intelligent enough to recognize that she couldn't navigate this planet alone. Rylan, sensing the genuine danger she was in, decided to offer his help, though with guarded reservations. Their truce was born not out of friendship, but necessity. As they moved together, a delicate balance of power and respect began to form, each understanding that, for now, they were each other's best hope. The journey through the wilderness was grueling. Ilera, used to the comfort and control of her advanced society, found herself stumbling over roots and rocks, her once pristine attire now torn and stained. Rylan, however, moved with a natural ease, his every step calculated, his every action purposeful. He led her through dense forests, over treacherous terrain, and across rivers swollen with recent rain. Ilera struggled to keep up, her injuries slowing her down, but Rylan was patient, offering a steady hand when she faltered. At first, she resented needing his help, her pride wounded more than her body. But as they pressed on, she began to see the depth of his knowledge. Rylan could find food where she saw only weeds, could navigate by the stars and the subtle signs of nature, and seemed to know every sound in the forest, every rustle of leaves. He spotted dangers long before they were visible, guiding her away from threats she would never have perceived. Slowly, her disdain turned to grudging respect. Rylan wasn't just surviving, he was thriving in a way that defied her expectations of the primitive. Their journey took on a different tone when Rylan's unique abilities came to light. Ilera watched in astonishment as he knelt by a stream, seemingly communicating with a creature hidden in the brush. Moments later, a small pack of native animals emerged, their eyes meeting Rylan's before they scattered into the forest, as if conveying a message only he could understand. It wasn't just that Rylan knew the land, he was connected to it, in a way that transcended her understanding. When a predatory creature later ambushed them, Rylan's swift intervention, using not just his weapons but a call that sent the animal retreating, saved her life. Ilera was left breathless, not just from the danger, but from the realization that there was more to Rylan than she had ever imagined. This world, once so alien and threatening to her, held a beauty she had overlooked, a beauty that Rylan was a part of. The threat from the hostile faction loomed large, a constant reminder that their survival was tenuous. The enemy, with their advanced tracking devices and lethal weapons, scoured the planet for Ilera. But their technological prowess was no match for the planet's unforgiving landscape and Rylan's cunning. He led Ilera through paths that were invisible to the untrained eye, using the environment itself as a shield. When the enemy came too close, Rylan's quick thinking and intimate knowledge of the terrain led them to narrow escapes, hiding in a cave system unknown to all but the native wildlife, or doubling back to throw their pursuers off the trail. These moments of peril forced them to rely on each other more than ever. Ilera's initial hesitation in following Rylan's lead dissipated, replaced by a growing trust. She had never imagined that someone without the Empire's technology could be so resourceful, so attuned to their surroundings. Each escape from danger was a victory, not just over their pursuers, but against the doubts and prejudices that had initially divided them. As the days passed and the dangers persisted, Ilera and Rylan found themselves talking more, their conversations drifting from survival to more personal topics. Ilera spoke of the Zixaran Empire, its technological marvels, and the burdens of her role as princess, expected to be flawless, always in control. Rylan listened, his expression thoughtful, before sharing stories of his own people. He spoke of a time before he was alone, of traditions that honored the land and its creatures, of a warrior spirit that was passed down through generations. His life had been one of struggle and loss, but also of deep connection to the world around him. Ilera was struck by how different their worlds were, yet how similar their values could be. The honor that Rylan lived by, the respect for life and nature, mirrored the ideals she had been taught, though expressed in a way she had never considered. Her admiration for him grew, not just for his skills, but for the depth of his character. He was not the primitive she had once thought, but a warrior in his own right, with a wisdom that could not be measured by technology. Rylan, in turn, began to see Ilera not just as a burden or a stranger, but as someone who carried a weight of responsibility he could understand, even if her world was beyond his comprehension. Their respect for each other solidified, the bond between them deepening with every shared story, every hard-won victory against the odds. The tension in the air grew as they ventured deeper into the forest, both aware that their enemies were closing in. Ilera's thoughts were consumed with survival, but a nagging sense of unease crept in. It wasn't just the relentless pursuit that troubled her, there was something else, something she couldn't quite place. It wasn't until they stumbled upon a distress signal, a Zixaran beacon, that the truth unraveled. Ilera's heart leapt with hope when she recognized the signal as one from her own people. But the relief was short-lived. As they approached the source, a figure emerged from the shadows, a fellow Zixaran, battered but alive. He claimed to have survived the crash as well, hiding until now. His words seemed genuine, but Rylan's instincts flared with suspicion. Ilera, desperate for a connection to her home, dismissed Rylan's concerns. But when night fell, the betrayal struck. In the dead of night, the Zixaran turned on them, revealing his allegiance to the hostile faction. He had been a spy, sent to ensure the princess's capture. The betrayal was swift and brutal. Rylan was caught off guard, a blade slicing across his side as he tried to defend them. Their hiding spot was compromised, and the enemy closed in. Ilera's trust in her own people shattered in that moment, the betrayal cutting deeper than any wound. The aftermath was a mess of emotions. Ilera, struggling to tend to Rylan's injury, was overwhelmed with guilt. She had ignored his warnings, blinded by her need to trust her own kind. Now Rylan lay injured because of her naivety. Rylan, though silent, couldn't hide the hurt in his eyes. He had put his life on the line for her, and this was the result. The unspoken question hung between them: was it worth it? Should he continue risking everything for her? The rift between them widened as they moved through the forest, the silence heavy with unspoken resentment. But fate had other plans. When a sudden ambush by the hostile faction left Rylan vulnerable, Ilera's instincts kicked in. Without hesitation, she put herself in harm's way, using her damaged weapon to create a diversion, giving Rylan the chance to escape. In that moment, Rylan saw something in Ilera that he hadn't before, a resolve, a willingness to sacrifice, that spoke of her true character. She wasn't just a princess sheltered by her empire, she was a warrior in her own right. Rylan's past was a scar that had never truly healed, a wound buried deep within him. As they rested in a hidden cave, safe for the moment, he finally opened up to Ilera. He spoke of his tribe, once a proud and thriving people who lived in harmony with the planet. They had no need for advanced technology. Their strength lay in their bond with the land and its creatures. But that harmony was shattered when an alien incursion, much like the one now hunting Ilera, descended upon them. His tribe had been decimated, wiped out by beings who saw them as nothing more than primitive obstacles in their path. Rylan had survived by sheer luck and had vowed never to let outsiders harm his world again. The pain in his voice was palpable as he recounted the loss, the betrayal by the very people who claimed to be more advanced, more civilized. Ilera listened, the pieces of the puzzle falling into place. Rylan's distrust of her, his reluctance to accept her as anything more than a burden, all stemmed from this deep-seated trauma. But now, as they sat together in the dim light of the cave, something shifted. Ilera saw Rylan not just as a rugged survivor, but as a man who had lost everything, yet still chose to fight. His so-called primitive instincts were born from a history of survival and resilience, a history that demanded respect. Ilera felt a kinship with him, understanding that they were both products of their pasts, both fighting for something larger than themselves. The realization that they were running out of time spurred them into action. The hostile faction was closing in, and they couldn't run forever. They needed a plan, a way to turn the tables and confront their enemies head-on. Ilera, drawing on her knowledge of Zixaran technology, suggested using what little remained of her ship's systems to create a trap. Rylan, ever resourceful, proposed using the environment to their advantage, drawing the enemy into the treacherous terrain where they could strike. As they strategized, their bond grew stronger. The mistrust that had once divided them was now replaced by a shared goal, a mutual understanding. They had come to rely on each other, not just for survival, but for the strength to face what lay ahead. In those quiet moments before the storm, they found solace in each other's presence, a connection that went beyond words. The stakes were high, and they both knew that this could be their final stand. But for the first time, they faced it not as two individuals from different worlds, but as allies bound by a common cause and a growing admiration that hinted at something more. The final confrontation took place in a dense, fog-laden valley, where jagged cliffs and twisted trees provided the perfect cover for Rylan's guerrilla tactics. The area was known to Rylan as a natural fortress, a place where the land itself could be weaponized. The hostile faction descended with their sleek, intimidating ships, their advanced technology humming ominously as they scanned for any sign of the princess. But the fog played tricks on their sensors, and the narrow passages between the cliffs forced them to disembark and proceed on foot, a decision that would prove to be their undoing. As the enemy advanced, Rylan and Ilera struck from the shadows. Rylan's traps were deadly in their simplicity, hidden pits lined with sharpened stakes, rock slides triggered by the slightest touch, and creatures roused from their lairs to sow chaos among the invaders. The planet itself seemed to rise up against the hostile faction, with Rylan guiding its fury. The enemy's reliance on their technology became their weakness. They couldn't adapt to the unpredictable and hostile terrain. Ilera, once reliant on her advanced tools, now used them with a newfound wisdom. She didn't try to outmatch the enemy's technology but instead used it to complement Rylan's tactics. Her weapon, once just a tool of destruction, became a device to distract and mislead, creating false signals that lured enemies into Rylan's traps. She hacked into the remains of her ship's systems to create electromagnetic pulses, shorting out the enemy's equipment at critical moments. For the first time, she was an active participant in the fight, matching Rylan's cunning with her own resourcefulness. Together, they became an unstoppable force, blending Rylan's deep understanding of the land with Ilera's tactical mind. The climax of the battle came when they confronted the traitor from Ilera's own ranks. He stood at the center of the enemy forces, a smug expression on his face as he revealed the depths of his treachery. His motivation was simple and cold. He had seen the fall of the Zixaran Empire as inevitable, and had chosen to side with the faction he believed would emerge victorious. To him, Ilera was a pawn, a bargaining chip to secure his place in the new order. But he had underestimated the bond that had formed between Ilera and Rylan. The fight was fierce, with the traitor wielding technology that was advanced even by Zixaran standards. But Ilera and Rylan had something more, each other. They fought in perfect sync, their movements fluid and coordinated, their trust in each other absolute. Ilera's quick thinking and Rylan's raw strength complemented each other perfectly, and together they overcame the traitor's defenses. The final blow was delivered by Ilera, her blade finding its mark with a precision born of necessity. The traitor fell, and with him, the last of the hostile faction's resolve crumbled. But the victory came at a cost. Both Rylan and Ilera were pushed to their limits, physically and emotionally drained by the ordeal. In the aftermath of the battle, the valley was eerily silent, the fog lifting to reveal the devastation left behind. Ilera and Rylan stood among the wreckage, their bodies bruised and battered, but their spirits unbroken. They had survived against all odds, but now the reality of what came next weighed heavily on them. Ilera knew she had to return to her empire, to rebuild and take her place once more. The hostile threat was neutralized, but her responsibilities were far from over. As they prepared to part ways, there was a new understanding between them. Ilera no longer saw Rylan's world as primitive. She recognized its strengths, its beauty, and the wisdom it held. Rylan, in turn, had come to respect the complexities of Ilera's life and the burden she carried as a leader of her people. They had learned from each other, and that knowledge had changed them both. Their farewell was bittersweet. There were no grand declarations, just a mutual respect and a shared acknowledgement of what they had been through together. Ilera promised to return if the need arose, and Rylan, though he didn't say it, knew he would welcome her back. They parted as allies, perhaps even friends, with the unspoken understanding that their paths might cross again. As Ilera's ship ascended into the sky, leaving the wild planet behind, she couldn't help but reflect on how much had changed. The blending of the primitive and the advanced had created something new, something stronger than either could have been alone. She smiled to herself, thinking of the unlikely alliance that had saved them both, and wondered what the future might hold. Whatever it was, she knew that the lessons learned here would stay with her, guiding her as she returned to her world, changed, but not alone.